For those of you just joining us, welcome. This is Nick Sorensen, Pathlock, formerly Greenlight, Senior Director Marketing, and today's joint webcast with our partner KPMG will cover how real-time application monitoring can automate governance orchestration across disparate applications for a 360-degree view of risk and compliance. Today's presenters are Engel Schmidt from KPMG, a Senior Director in the Security Controls ERP space, and our own James Rice, Pathlock's VP of Customer Solutions. Just a reminder that we'd love to hear from you afterwards. If you do have questions, we'll be setting aside a few minutes at the end of the presentation for Q&A. And also a recorded version of this webcast will be available on the website afterwards. With that said, I'm going to hand it off to Engel.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate it, and I really appreciate you guys letting me join you today. Hello, everybody. And let me get this started here. There we go. I'd like to start, and from KPMG's perspective, kind of in the overall space and what's going on in the market and at companies from what we're seeing. We did a survey. Actually, this is late 2019, early 2020, and we see it holding true as companies go through, I guess, their transformation process from early on through planning. And we've all heard about disruption in the marketplace with all the different companies that have disrupted certain industries, but there's a disruption going on inside of companies, right? So companies are looking for ways to be more efficient and profitable. So a lot of different attempts to do different changes within companies are happening, and it's falling on the CFO's role because now he's wearing two hats. He's got his traditional ensuring the stability and control of the finance function, but now he's got to enable the agility and profitability in innovation, because there's a lot of innovation going on within the operations, but also as it tends to how you're going to manage that innovation, right? And a lot of that falls on IT. So we're seeing that change come across, and it's recognizing, and a lot of the disruption and the change comes from a lot of the technologies that are now available. A lot more have come on. Technology has somewhat leapfrogged in the last couple of years with all the capabilities, and cloud technologies is really big now. Machine learning is catching on more and more, and companies are building machine learning into their applications. There's a lot of robotic process automation with AI. We're starting to see blockchain come around more and more. I think it's a very new technology, but I think a lot of practicality in it, and we're starting to see a lot of companies try to build that into it. Natural language processing has been around for a while, but it's really getting more advanced, helping out. But the big thing around digital analytics and data management is huge, and I think that's where a lot of companies are starting to see a lot of the disruption and getting their arms around that piece of it, of the technology. So really the CFOs, their agenda is really trying to figure out, what has happened, why it happened, what will happen. A lot of that comes around with predictive analytics that you're seeing built into it, and back to the data, and how do you capture all that data? We're creating a whole lot more data in these systems than we ever did before. So how do you filter through that? How do you use that data? How do you make it relevant in your environment and not spend your time in kind of dead searches in these large forests of data, right? Because off to the right, we have this. You're going to see more and more automated processing take place in these systems. So your end users won't be doing the repetitive task anymore. You're going to see AI and machine learning kick in and do a lot of the repetitive tasks from that. And so your user are going to be more high level or high value in the company, doing bigger decision making based on the capabilities and the information that comes out of these tools. And from that, what we really want to drive into today is really talk about some of the risk and controls that we're seeing. We're already seeing a couple of different industries start to go through some of these transformations and start implementing a lot of the tools and capabilities that are available today. I still think there's a huge wave forthcoming in the next couple of years. Because a lot of these, there's been some early adopters and a lot of lessons learned, but you still have to address your risk and controls because we're seeing that change, right? So, CEO is probably one of the biggest concern of of their organization is being hacked from cyber perspective, right? And cyber is no longer just a network issue like, hey, they got into our network and they're getting the files. They've got the applications on the other side. So they're actually getting into the network, taking over the applications and actually running transactions or changing your application and running that and creating a lot of fraud and disruption in your organization. And so it's more and more critical that cyber not only addresses your network, but there's certain cyber capabilities around those applications that you really have to address. It may have been ignored in the past that really need to be considered. And probably the biggest concern is a lot of the manual controls that you perform today, they're going to go away because of all the automation, right? That's good and bad because automation brings, a level of control reliance and risk in itself. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more a little later on. I think some of these early adopters, as you see some of the statistics here, where these transformations are starting they're achieving stakeholder satisfaction and they're delivering a lot of benefits. But I think that's going to continue to increase because, like I said, we've seen early adopters over the last couple of years, but as we move forward, more and more are going to take place. This last year, I think everything's been a bit difficult for everyone in the business. But I think what we saw was a lot of companies pause a lot of transformation projects. There were a lot that were already underway, which is good, and they had to learn how to do things differently, kind of put teams virtual. But now they're back to the table, and we're seeing a lot of planning and getting ready for the future. And companies are starting to want to take what they learned from what they've seen in some of these early adoptions, right? Because some of that data is there. We bring a lot to the table, and that we've participated in a lot of these transformations so far, and we have lessons learned already that we're bringing to the table. A lot around risk and controls because we actually work in a lot of companies just managing the risk and controls perspective of some of these transformations, right? And it goes back to some of the basics of what companies have from their control frameworks and building those out and addressing some of these new technologies and capabilities because of the automation and the capabilities that they have today. They're having to go back and readdress some of those controls. Moving forward, I am, talking about the different levels of risk. We still have the same concerns around, fraud, cybersecurity, just weakness of controls. One of the interesting facts is KPMG we do our own research across the globe with different companies and companies that not only that we audit, but the companies that we don't audit. And we have groups that read financials and 10Ks, and they look for what's coming out of those reports. And we're still seeing a lot of material weaknesses across the globe from companies that get back to some of the basic security and control issues that are popping up as material weaknesses. And I think if companies don't address that early on in these transformations and put it as part of their planning, you're going to continue to see that, and it's going to continue to rise because there's just so many new capabilities and nuances with these systems, right? So we talk a little bit about the cyber, but the data privacy is a huge piece of it. Like I said, these systems are creating huge data lakes, and if you don't take care of your cyber, you've got exposure not only from external, but you got exposure from internal users too. And how do you manage that data privacy, right? Financial statements have always been big. Who has access to do what, and how can they be manipulated? I've had companies that are more concerned about getting information being exposed that they can get out on the street before an announcement's made, which might affect stock prices. And again, data management, being able to handle that, and just cloud technologies is another huge piece. You think about all the systems that are now going to cloud delivery, and it's great, and it's more efficient and less costly in a sense because the companies are taking it off their books and they're putting it on somebody else's books. But one of the things you need to consider is that updates come to those systems, right? You're no longer in charge of those updates. So do those updates affect your controls? Do they affect your security? If a change is made there, did you create maybe a bot or some sort of application that works in between your cloud application and your on-prem application that relies on that, and did you break that? So there's a lot of different testing and a lot of different types of controls that you're going to have to consider in that sense. We talked about blockchain. I actually spoke to someone within KPMG that's done a few assessments where we've actually seen blockchain hacked in the past, and that's kind of interesting. It's just such a new technology and how they're utilizing, and I'm not sure the details around it, but I think it's an interesting play and how it's going to be used going forward in the market, and I see a big play in it. It's just hadn't really built up yet. And again, the intelligent automation, we're seeing that come out in a lot of these systems, and like I said, get rid of some of the repetitive tasks. So there's a lot of different risk that we have to cover just from the applications. And so when we talk about some of these large transformations and the different levels, we go back to some of our standard business risk and the opportunities and threats, but we really have to go back and address our strategies and, what are those services that are going to be delivered, and how are we going to take care of it, and what mechanisms are we going to use, and what technologies are really going to be used, right? Because like I said, the new systems are no longer a very siloed ERP system. It's a very dynamic system. It's got we're kind of calling it best of breed, because you're going to have applications not only from one vendor but multiple vendors used in a process from now on, right? And so now you're trying to address, how do I give access from the front end from my identity management type tools, and I want to be able to provision a user all the way down to the different applications and make sure that they have the right degree of access, and can they do the same things that they did before? Are we restricting the other types of systems so that the things they shouldn't be able to do, or maybe even seeing? And so you've got all those different levels of activities. You have different levels of permissions in the different applications. In some cases, you have new processes that cross applications. So just a purchasing function can cross two, maybe three different types of applications these days. And so how is that being managed? It's pretty interesting. And so really being able to look at your technologies and your capabilities, and readdress those controls from the very get-go. And so, like I said, we've seen some, probably in the utility space, is one of the early adopters of transformations, and we've been on quite a few that we've been able to bring lessons learned, and now we're starting to see a rise in the I guess the life sciences. So that's another industry that we're starting to see a lot of transformations that are already underway, and a lot of planning going on. So some of the, more and more now we're being able to take those lessons learned and be able to sit down with clients and go through what a controlled environment should look like, and some of what that future operating model should consider. There's a lot of different technologies that can be utilized. Where do you utilize them? Where do you put them in place? I think it's really key in developing a good environment. Just to cover this slide real quick, I mean, we're going back to the basics of, you have your applications, you have your data, and you have your people, right? There's security risk around all of those from an operational standpoint, so you have to manage that, because we're always going to have users both internally and externally that are looking to create violations, and so we need to manage that. I've already covered this. I'm going to kind of slide past this, because this is more of the slide I'd like to talk to you about, because where we're saying and really being identifying that risk. Like I said, risk is changing. It's still there, but I think the way we apply it and the way we look at it is going to become more dynamic, right? Like I said, processes are crossing systems, security is crossing systems. You've got these different technologies, they do different capabilities, a lot more automation, machine learning. How does that affect? Do you have the right controls to test and evaluate that those are operating correctly, as opposed to somebody actually doing manual inputs in the systems before? So your tests are all going to change across your environment from that you have to do, whether it's quarterly or yearly, right? We still want to prevent, detect, and react. I think more and more with the capability of the tools, we can look to creating more of that prevention and detection a lot easier than what we have in the past. From a prevention and being able to put in the types of access controls and data protection, the tools have a lot more capabilities today, and with the how easy it is to implement, analytics and dashboards, we can create environments that we're basically preventing in real time, right? Whether the tools have capabilities to control the risk, or we have a way to detect with smart monitoring and see it in real time. I think that that's key, because before it was, hey, a quarter passed or a financial um, period passed and we had a problem. Let's go back and research, and it may take another quarter to figure out where that problem occurred, and then really dig down and find it. Nowadays, we can put together systems that actually detect it, and we can find that it happened just minutes before, and be able to go back and fix it or reverse it, and you know fix the financials way before it really gets bad, or you have a major loss that could hurt the corporation. Again, it's all around the technology and the capabilities of the tools, and that's why we like our friends here with their capabilities, because the availability to get into not only one system but multiple systems and build those controls across the systems are capable are huge, and we're starting to recommend those, not only from, if you look at an organization, and how do you prevent things, and put in systems up front that not only control it from your operations, but you also have to monitor, right? So we see different levels of tools going in different parts of the organization. So maybe the IT organization has a certain set of tools. Your auditors may have a different set, or they may use them in a different manner. We've actually helped companies set those up from different perspectives, and so that you get pretty much a double layer of responsibility when you're looking at your risk and being able to manage it. And so I think a lot of this is going to continue to change and evolve, and it's all going to be for the better. But I think from KPMG's perspective and what we see in the market, it's just like every other implementation in the past. You really have to put a good focus on your security and controls environment, and make sure that that's integrated into the planning of the larger environment. Because if it doesn't, and you try to do it after the fact, it's a lot more costly from what we're seeing, and you don't get the same benefits and the value out of your control environment that you had before. So making sure that you've identified not only the risk, but the capabilities of the systems that you're putting in, and then also the tools that you're going to use to manage those risks is key. And so like I said, we've been helping companies identify and depending on what their needs are and what they're trying to address, what are the capable tools and what makes sense for their environment. So I'm going to turn this over back to James. I think give him a chance to run through some of these technologies. I think it's great what they have and what they're presenting today, because it fits right in with where we've been going with our clients, and really trying to drive for a much more controlled environment in a very dynamic environment that's being put in place in a lot of companies today.
Perfect, Ingo. Thank you, and really appreciate that context. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is James Rice. I'm responsible for the customer solutions team at Pathlock, and really what I'm here to focus on today is talk to you about how you can apply, digital transformation, which we've all heard about or thought about, or maybe even going through. But how do you apply digital transformation to security and compliance to address some of the pieces that Ingo was discussing before? And with applications being the new perimeter in a lot of cases, Pathlock is focused on monitoring the millions of users across billions of transactions for some of the largest organizations in the world. I mean, you see some of the names here, right? It's across industry, it's both public and private sector, as well as working really with a lot of different technology partners that we support. And so what we do is help unify and orchestrate around access and activity. How we do that is by integrating natively with all business applications, so that we can monitor all users, all of the activity they're performing, and help look at all of the risks that surfaces. And so what I really want to talk to you about today is how you can apply some of this, and really what it takes to be able to transform the security and compliance activities that you're doing today. And if we really kind of think about each of these columns, because they're hugely important, the first really starts with the application. This is where you need to think about not just your core ERP system, but really looking across all of the different critical applications, because as digital transformation is happening within the organization, right? Ingle talked about this. Purchasing might touch 2, 3, 4 different applications at times. So you really need to be able to look holistically across all of the application landscape. But that's really just the plumbing, right? That's being able to look at the information on all these systems. But then the next two columns are really just two sides of the same coin, because this is what you do with it. And a lot of people think about governing user access. So this is the ability to analyze access for things like segregation of duties or critical access risk, the ability to do appropriateness reviews, so maybe every 90 days looking at contractors, and every twice a year looking at employees to make sure the access they have is still appropriate. So that's really kind of on the analyzing, but then also supporting the change management, being able to do all the request, approval, workflow, provisioning that goes along with joiners, movers, and leavers as people, move around your organization or join or maybe leave. And then finally, also being able to support that from a temporary access perspective, not just looking at the day-to-day access someone has, but what about that developer that needs access into production? Well, there may be perfectly valid reasons for it, but they don't need it 100% of the time. Or that database administrator who has the ability to make changes in the database, they probably only need that access on a cutover weekend. So really being able to support more of a temporary concept of access as well, so that you can now do just in time check in, check out, and instead of giving the these super users or these admins credentials that they keep 24/7. Because as Ingle was talking about, when an external threat becomes an internal threat and maybe some of those credentials get exposed, you're helping minimize the attack vector. Now, that's all on the can-do analysis side, but the flip side of that coin, because knowing what a user can do isn't enough, you need to look at the did-do analysis. This is where we get into really activity monitoring. And this is where we'll focus a lot based on what Ingle was talking about before, about how you can really start looking at either automating controls, and controls will be like where you define if A, B, or C happens, let me know about it. And a simple example would be, from a segregation of duties perspective, the can-do analysis tells you that a user has the access to create and pay a vendor. The did-do side tells you exactly what vendors they created and exactly what vendors they paid. Because at the end of the day, the essence of the risk is really looking for someone who creates and pays the same vendor. Ingle called these sort of those dead searches, where you're just kind of looking for a needle in the haystack. That's what digital transformation around compliance can help with, is really, you can think about it as AI behind the scenes that's watching all the transactions flowing through and really surfacing those exceptions when they occur. Because if James Rice in your organization creates vendors A, B, and C, and then pays vendor X, Y, and Z, well, that doesn't really matter. It's only if and when a user creates and pays the same vendor. So if I were to create Acme Corp a couple months ago and then issue a payment to them today, that's a materialized exception to an internal control process. But controls are important from the compliance side, or it could be business process, SOD, IT general controls. There's all sorts of different examples there. But there's also more of the behavioral monitoring that says, well, what about the things I don't know? And what if I have a customer service rep who tends to look at 50 to 100 customers a day? But today they're looking at thousands of customers and downloading that information, right? That's anomalous to the way they normally use their access. And so this did-do analysis is really focused on exactly what people are doing in these business applications to help surface risk or potential issues if and when they occur. And really, kind of I said all of those things because at the end of the day, that's the goal. Whether you're responsible for financial reporting or IT or industry specific requirements or just security sort of anomalous activity, it's being able to let the machines, let the technology do all the heavy lifting, find those needles in the haystack for you so that you can then react to those, review those, do all the things that Ingle was talking about before. So this is really the 50,000-foot level of what the Greenlight platform provides. But I think what's important is if we kind of drill into the details of each of these are the things you need to think about as you're looking at moving forward on this topic. And I've already mentioned this one before, but the first is, how do I get real-time integration to all of my applications? This is sort of our top 10, top 20 that Greenlight sees. Your applications will vary because you're going to have different systems in your landscape. But the point is, it oftentimes goes well beyond the ERP system. And so first, you really need bi-directional communication with these applications so that you can know what's happening both from an access perspective as well as from an activity perspective. And so that's one of the first tenets from Greenlight, is we provide that bi-directional read-write connectivity. But we're not just a dummy data connector. We actually map all of these different disparate security models and different data models. I mean, if you think about it, every application has their own security concepts. Every application has their own entity relationship diagrams for where payment information is stored and how vendors are maintained. And so Greenlight maps all of that information as part of our platform to really make it easier so that now this feeds into a single view, a single pane of glass, and an analysis engine that allows you to ultimately think about kind of three key concepts. The first is the ability to quantify risk, quantify the number of times things are happening, quantify the dollar value that goes along with that. Because we're directly connected to these applications, you can really look at this information in a business rich context. But at the end of the day, there's also case management or incident management, where you need to be able to take action on these things. You need to be able to respond once that needle in the haystack is identified. And then finally, audit reporting, being able to satisfy both the internal and external audit requirements that are put on you. Because at the end of the day, most of the people that are probably in this room and in this session with us today are not focused on the audit side. And so you really want to kind of get audit off your back and be able to let, again, the system do all that heavy lifting for you. And the final piece is, with all of that, allows the ability to not just be a detective control, because it's one thing to find out about these things after the fact, but also be able to be a preventative control, where you can stop transactions in real time. You can terminate access if and when issues present themselves, so that you don't become the next headline in the Wall Street Journal. Now, while this is the plumbing, that analysis engine really is kind of the key thing that helps unlock the value for an organization, right? It unlocks the value because it's doing a lot of the automation for you. It's replacing all of the manual work that's done around preventing, alerting on exceptions, preparing audit reports, testing of controls, reviewing or eliminating false positives. Again, technology, digital transformation can do all that work for you. And what that allows you to do is simplify your monitoring, because you're only reviewing exceptions, right? More of an exception-based monitoring mechanism, where issues are identified for you and you're just working against those to be able to document any of the findings. That allows you to ensure security, ensure compliance, because this is continuous monitoring. This is 100% review. This is not a 10% sample of a set of data from a quarter ago, right? This is looking at all of the information in real time and helping have that audit ready reporting. And ultimately really frees up a lot of your resources, allows you to do more with less. You know, that's a key theme that we're hearing from a lot of customers, especially in this crazy world that we all live in right now. We're constantly being asked to do more with less. And so this is where technology can really help unlock that value for you. Now, the reason that is because without technology, you have whatever your application landscape is, where you're doing manual point-in-time reviews of this information. Technology allows you to move from, think of it like a snapshot, right? Like a picture of a point in time, or a single report that gets issued to you that's old and outdated the minute you have it. Versus really more of like that CCTV, continuous security, continuous compliance, where the technology is monitoring thousands of users and dozens of applications across millions of activities within your environment to surface those needles in a haystack for you. So you can really monitor every application in your systems to see if and when there's something that's worth your time to review. And the way Greenlight really helps enable that is because of our direct native real-time integrations, we actually map all of those disparate security models. You know, this goes back to, again, the way Ingle said it. What if purchasing touches multiple applications? Well, this happens to be an ERD diagram for payments in Oracle. There's like 45 or 46 different tables in Oracle eBusiness Suite that you have to look at to get to the payment level data. Now imagine trying to correlate that to Coupa or to Manhattan or to other warehousing or consolidations or whatever the other applications may be that you have. That's one of Greenlight's claims to fame. We map hundreds of different business activities across thousands of tables and views to really make this easy for you, because at the end of the day, there's a bunch of different data sets that you want to look at, right? There's some accounting, some HR, some inventory, you know all the different data points that your controls need to monitor. And so this is where Greenlight maps all that, because if you want to look at procurement related issues, well, you need vendor master information, you need invoicing data, you need goods receipt, you need payment information. Or if you want to look at inventory, right? You need the physical inventory, the stock transfers, the item masters. This is that mapping I'm talking about, mapping all of that different data across all these systems into these business concepts for you. And because we realize that IT general controls exist as well, right? This is not just financially related. This also helps support other IT related controls in the exact same manner. With the end of the day, the goal being to provide you a complete picture that can look at not only what a user can do in a system, because can do is really about potential risk. It says, hey, James Rice has the ability to create and maintain a vendor, as an example. But what about the activity that they perform? This is where you really only care about if they create and pay the same vendor. And so our level of being able to do that did-do level of transaction monitoring surfaces those material issues, because I would argue that while it's important to know what users can do, it's arguably more important to know what they did do and focus on the 4 users that created and paid the same vendors and the 1,000 times they did it and the millions of dollars worth of potential exposure that put on your organization. But this also helps solve some of those other problems, like the dead searches that Ingle talked about. Because look at this example from one of our customers. They had millions of transactions that needed to be looked at, but there were no needles in that haystack. And I bet a lot of you go through some of the same thing. You're trying to prove a negative with your compliance activities, but checking the box for audit and compliance also doesn't, protect your business necessarily. Being able to see the quantification of how access materializes into potential activity issues you need to be reviewing, that's really where a lot of the power comes in and what technology can do for you today. So I'm going to pause here, and we're about to open it up for questions, and I'll turn it back over to Nick here in just a second. But because at the end of the day, what KPMG, what Pathlock wants to do is really help you protect the business and do more than just checking the box for audit and compliance. What you see here are some of the quotes from our customers, right? Where a $14 billion manufacturer actually bought Greenlight at the end of the year, bought Greenlight in October, went live in December, did a look back over the entire fiscal year before, and found $16 million in fraud that they hadn't seen before. Or we had another top tech company that said, I wish I had found you before, right? Because if I had found you before, I just spent $15 million manually mitigating a material weakness with one of my audit teams. So these are the types of value statements that really we're seeing across our organizations. But we're going to really stop there. Our goal is to maybe open this up for some questions now, see what questions you have on this before we close out. So Nick, let me turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, James. And thank you, Engel. Yeah, we have 4 questions. Let's see, the first one, are you seeing an increase in the need for did-do analysis as companies continue to transition to the cloud?
Yeah, I can start on that, Ingo. I'd be interested in your feedback. I mean, I'm not
Yeah.
sure that I would say that the move to the cloud is increasing the need, but what I would say is that the move to the cloud is oftentimes making that level of analysis harder because these systems are no longer under your control and behind your firewall, and they're making that analysis more important because that application is now become the new perimeter. And so the need to do not just look at what access a user has, but what they actually did in those systems becomes even more important because a lot of the security that people apply to on-premise, where you're able to look at intrusion detection, you're able to look at vulnerability scans across your systems, you can't necessarily do in those cloud applications. So I think it definitely highlights the need, though not necessarily the driver. I don't know, Ingo, what have you seen?
No, I agree with you. I don't think it's the driver, but I think the value add of being able to do the did do before moving to the cloud is huge, right? Because it will redefine your risk statement or your risk capabilities, right? You're going to change that model if you can do the did do, because I'm going to go back to risk is nothing but a number. It's a dollar value, right? And unless you know that dollar value, you really don't know what your risk. There, for years we've said, as auditors, we'd go and say, hey, this is a risk. They can potentially do this, and it could have all this damage, but you don't really map it out because a lot of companies, even going way back, they didn't know who was actually doing what, right? We could go and get bits and pieces and do a lot of analysis to get there. Being able to do it as quick and efficiently as your software does, I think it's a huge value in being able to run it and understand what did take place, whether it's fraud or not. I mean, I've years ago I used to say, like, the oil companies, right? You go offshore on a rig and the person in that ERP could do anything, right? And oh, it's a huge risk. But what did they do, right? They're the only person out there running an entire little city on one rig, right? So you have to have somebody doing it, right? So you're going to have capabilities or situations where people have to be able to do things, but you need to be able to go and look and see, what are they doing? Is it within your parameters? Does it fit within that risk parameter and what you need? It's when you have those outliers, but you don't know that unless you're being able to look at that. And I think that's what this did do, creates the value for clients. I think it's huge in being able to, redefine your control framework and identify what you really need to focus on moving forward.
Thank you, Engel. James. Here's one for James. I think someone's asking, what's the performance overhead with the real-time monitoring on ERPs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we get this a lot. I tend to try and let our customers speak for themselves because the likes of, Microsoft, Chevron, British Petroleum, the US Navy, right? All of these organizations that are leveraging leveraging Pathlock are not going to be using us if we were negatively impacting their ERP system. Now, there's a lot of different ways that we do that, and we have a proprietary technology connectors that really ensure we're not negatively impacting performance. But the short answer is that we are able to both do real time as well as batch analysis without negatively impacting the performance of the ERP or other business applications that we're connected to.
Thank you. This one's for Engel. Does KPMG have any clients where KPMG audits Greenlight or Pathlock as an in-scope application for the audit? If so, any key procedures or areas of focus that KPMG can discuss?
Yes, we do have clients that are using the tools from an audit perspective and utilizing it in that manner, right? Being able to do both the searches from, as external auditors come in, they utilize some of the tools and capabilities that the system has. We can also rely on a lot of the capabilities that internal auditor has already done. And if they're comfortable with those searches, and there's quite a few clients that actually use the Greenlight tools, and we can actually leverage that in our audits. And so yes, I agree. It's a big capability. In addition, rather than trying to do it kind of manually and doing a lot of assessments from different systems individually.
Thanks, Engel. And are you working more with IT or finance for the activity monitoring side?
Is that for me or?
Well, I guess that's a different question. That wasn't pointed at anyone particular.
Yeah, and I can start here. I'd very be interested, Engel, in your take
Yep.
as well from a KPMG perspective. But so what we're seeing is that it actually kind of spans across three different areas, and the business ultimately owns the risk when it comes to things like financial reporting, business process controls, that sort of stuff. IT owns the risk when it comes to IT general controls. So it does vary based on really what you're trying to monitor for. And then also the third area is internal audit, because at the end of the day, the internal audit team is likely going to come do an analysis on top of the work that both business and IT have done. But if I'm really kind of trying to break it down, I'd say it's probably in the 40% business, 40% IT. Those are probably pretty equal, and then 20% on the internal audit side. But Engel, what about you?
No, and I agree with you there. I think it's been a mix, and typically, it's again, this year has been really weird, right? So being virtual and everything. So when we're at clients, we tend to spend most of our time around either IT or audit, right? That's just naturally that's where our work is. That's where we're digging in, and our sleeves are rolled up, working side by side with the clients their way. We're still doing a lot of that from a virtual standpoint, but it seems like a lot of more meetings this past year. We've had, or at least I've been, speaking more to chief accounting officers and the financial side, right? Because they're wondering how to get their arms around some of this stuff and what are they doing moving forward. And there's other things at play, a lot around resources and managing people in a virtual perspective. They tend to, or I don't know if they've gravitated or that's just their new duties to try to figure out the workforce. But it seems like in the last year, we've had a lot more conversations with the higher level finance folks, because there's just a big interest in how to manage this. And then how do they, I guess, finance and give the capabilities to IT and their users to do the jobs that they need to do from the perspectives that the
Yeah.
business environment has changed, right? They're at home and not in the office so much.
Yeah, and Engel, to piggyback on that just a little bit, I think one of the things that we're seeing is the controllership group, because they have especially for public companies, a formal requirement around internal controls over financial reporting and having to make sure that everything is taken care of there. The other side would be the information security group that's looking at data privacy concerns and more caring about ensuring that bad things and insider threat is taken care of. So those are kind of some of the two big areas as well from our side.
Yeah, and I'll tag on to that even. I mean, I think like what I said early on about the cyber, right? You had your network guys and there's certain silos within like the CISO's office, right? You've got your application folks, you got your network folks. Well, now that cyber piece, they're coming up into the applications and they're trying to figure out how do I handle that in between, right? And so they're really looking at some of this from the application on down, right? And they're looking at, if I know what my users are doing within the application and I know I've got my users kind of boxed into wherever they need to be, like my finance people are doing finance, my sales guys are doing sales, however it's set up, when those anomalies spike up, they know that it's coming from somewhere else, right? And then they can connect both the network and the applications. And so yeah, I'll agree with that and add on with what I just said.
Thanks.
Around that.
Thanks, Engel. We have time for maybe one or two more. Here is another one. How does the technical design of a company's GRC risk rule set, segregation of duties, and sensitive access play a key input to the accuracy of detecting the did-do activity?
So I can take it from a technology perspective, and maybe Engel, you can take it from a process perspective, because from a technology perspective on our side, that risk control matrix, it is important. It's important because those are the things that you want to look at and the things that are going to be monitored for on a control basis. However, one of the things that's important, and we see at our customers, because we have customers that sort of span the gamut, some that have a really mature risk and control matrix, and some that don't. And quite frankly, they're asking us, saying, "Hey, you work with hundreds of customers. What type of examples and controls do you see people monitoring for most often?" And there is some industry specific flavor to that. But as a technology, we have out of the box controls based on all of the work that we've done across hundreds of different customers that people can choose from as a starting point. But to be frank, I think we typically see that may get you 80 to 90% of the way there. And there may be some customization of that or some additional rules based on your requirements that you may want to add. So if you have a very mature risk and control matrix, great, that helps know what you want to monitor. If not, you can really start with some of the leading practices and continue to grow from there.
Right. And I'll add on to that I think over the years, like you said, different companies also have different perspectives, right? Where did the risk matrix get built from? Who had more control over how it was managed over the years? Your security guys want to have almost no controls because they just get asked all the time, give me access, and they're trying to appease the business, but they also have rules and regulations to follow. You've got your auditors that want a really strong control over that stuff, and so you've got to find that blend, right? And so the tools and capabilities have been, they've gotten a lot better over the years in being able to identify who had access and understand that risk. But really, I think with the last few years, with the advancement of these tools and the capabilities to do cross systems, it's even it's more important to go back to the overall risk process and being able to apply security from that perspective, right? What is really trying to take place? Who do you want to have access? How can you monitor it today? Maybe you don't need as many controls, matrices, as long as you can monitor and tell what's going on in the system. And so, because you can when something else has gone astray immediately, rather than a reactive control that could be a month or a quarter or even a year behind the activity, right? So.
Great. I think that's all we have time for today. We went a little bit over. Thank you, Engel, and thank you, James. And everyone, thank you for attending. Don't forget to visit pathlock.com. If you want more information, request a demo, or simply to reach out to us. And have a very good rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.